check on this. Great. I think we're ready to go. My name is Mark Cheshire, and it's a great pleasure to be here today. What I'd like to do is to think back to where everything came from in this great community around APIs. And it's natural when you look up the stars that you want to think about where things came from. I remember it was back in 2007 that I joined this really small company in Barcelona in Spain called 3Scale. At the time, there was 3Scale and another small company called Mashery. And that was really the beginnings of this movement around APIs. I remember in those early days having conversations with Mehdi, and I don't know if he's here in the audience. No, I can't see him. But Mehdi had this crazy idea, let's get a conference together to talk about this topic of APIs. And that was API Days. 10 years ago have passed. And it's just incredible looking at how the community has evolved. And it's a fantastic time when I look at the richness and the capabilities that you'll have as API developers. It's a wonderful time to be an API developer. But here you think, where is APIs in the title here of this presentation? And don't worry, because I'll get to that. I believe strongly that we're at the beginning of a big change. And you see it when you look at the conference agenda, you start to see more and more topics which are not API related. You see topics on event-driven, topics on identity management, on green IT. And it's a healthy sign that things are evolving. While though these presentations, they're all related to APIs, for me something that's missing is that it doesn't tie things together into a holistic whole. And so what I'm hoping to put us on is the beginning of a journey to look at how we can put together a guide towards a model of application connectivity. How can we think more broadly and holistically about application connectivity rather than only through the lens of REST APIs? As I do that, I took inspiration from Douglas Adams' famous book, and wonderful inspiration. And the Hitchhiker's Guide, it's all about everybody who's on this journey can all contribute towards the guide. And so I hope this is the beginning of a journey together with you, and I welcome your contributions as we move forward. So let's dive into things. And when I think also about Hitchhiker's Guide, I'm from Red Hat, and it aligns strongly with Red Hat's approach. So Red Hat, you probably know, is a 100% open source company. Everything we do is working together with the community. All of the work that's created by Red Hat engineers all goes back to the community. And it's very much in the spirit of that Hitchhiker's Guide to be able to boost innovation by sharing all of our knowledge together. So this is just an example of the many open source projects that Red Hat is involved in around application connectivity. Let's take a step back and look, what's driving application connectivity more broadly? First of all, it's the needs of the business. Business value only happens when you actually start to connect applications together. When applications are in silos, the value of those applications is far diminished. Secondly, applications need to be more flexible. Your application teams need to be able to respond for, maybe it's for resilience, or maybe it's for cost reasons that you want to move from on-prem to the cloud or from one cloud to another. And it's important that you have the ability to be able to port applications to wherever you can use that capability most effectively. Next is thinking about, traditionally, things have been very siloed in organizations, and decisions have been made independently, whether it's the networking team or the application team. We need to be able to work better together across these organizations and teams to be able to make more effective decisions. And the last comment is thinking about more broadly going beyond REST APIs and thinking about any type of endpoint that achieves integration, and especially taking a more of an event-driven approach to integration. So these are some of the 4 key concerns that are driving a broader look at application connectivity. The first step on any kind of change project is to think about the organizational aspects. And when you think about organizational aspects, it always comes down to the team. There is no better team in history than the crew of the Heart of Gold, the starship in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You had Zaphod Beeblebrox, his strong sidekick, Trillium, and of course, who can forget Marvin, the depressed robot. And in every organization, you're going to have different roles, and it's important to balance the needs of these different roles. So when you look at the organization, think about the different layers that you have for application connectivity. There's the layer of the networking concerns, the layer of the application and data concerns, and the layer of the business concerns. And each of those has different stakeholders. What I ask is that as you think about the approach to application connectivity, make sure that the needs and requirements of these stakeholders is closely aligned. What I'd like to do now is to provide a framework on how to start this communication and begin a journey for these teams to work more effectively together. The first part in this framework is to look at criteria and how to look at the different, how to evaluate different approaches to application connectivity. There are 4 key criteria I outline here. The first is around accessibility, second, around security, third, discoverability, and lastly, governability. So 4 key criteria. And whenever you look at any kind of connectivity requirement, if you look at it through the lens of these 4 key criteria, it'll give you a good basis to weigh up which is the right approach for you. Let's just go quickly through these. So accessibility, very briefly, is about what's the right connectivity requirements between any 2 endpoints. Is it internal to an enterprise? Is it more north-south communication, exposing integration points outside your organization, building up an ecosystem, allowing external partners to connect? When it comes to the type of integration, do you need to have something real-time event-driven, so asynchronous, or is it going to be a synchronous communication requirement? And then think about the performance characteristics and resilience characteristics you need. On security, absolutely very key, and it varies depending on which industry you're in, just how stringent your security requirements will be. But make sure you get this right from the beginning. It's very difficult to realize later that you didn't put the right security in place and begin correcting for that later after you've done an initial implementation. On discoverability, one of the values of this API community is it's put so much emphasis on developer experience. And when it comes to developer experience, one is the one of a developer discovering which is the right integration endpoint or APIs they can use, using a developer portal to make it easy, using open API specifications to make it easy to read documentation. But there's also aspects of machine discoverability. So it's important to consider what are the requirements, how easy should it be for the consumers of your connectivity endpoints to be discovered. And on governability, governability is all about making sure that you have the right level of control. It's very easy when you're doing a quick hello world scenario to bypass and forget about the governability requirements. But in the real world that you're in, you have to think about how you can control the whole life cycle of the applications you're deploying and how to manage everything, how to make sure that you handle availability and performance requirements. So governability is absolutely critical in the real world. That's a quick overview of the 4 criteria to evaluate application connectivity options. But what are the options? Now, if you're in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and you're looking for the absolute best cocktail in the galaxy, it's pretty easy. It's got to be the Pangalactic Gargle Blaster. But when it comes to application connectivity, it's not so clear-cut. There isn't one connectivity approach which is, by clear, the only right way to go. So you need to think more broadly. I'll take us through a very quick overview, and so this is by no means conclusive, but I'll give you a taster of how broad the application connectivity options are. First of all, let's think about the network layer. I'll talk about the network layer and the application layer. The business layer we'll leave to future thought experiments, so we'll just focus on 2 layers. From a networking perspective, think about, first of all, north-south requirements or ingress and egress to your application environment. The most simple requirement is allowing traffic, external traffic, into your network to reach your application service. And so that's a very simple requirement to deploy an ingress router. Then take the flip side of that. Your application is trying to reach some external service, and for that, it's a simple egress router from your cluster. So very simple. Let's notch things up a bit and look at more complex situation where whether it's for resilience needs or for cost management requirements, that you're actually running your application in 2 different clusters. And here, you can achieve that running exactly the same application environment in both clusters and have an external load balancer balance traffic between the 2 clusters. And then let's notch things up one more level of complexity. Now, you're trying to achieve the same, but not relying only on one single cloud provider or one single on-prem data center. You're now trying to make sure you can do this across clouds or across hybrid cloud. Here, you need yet a further external load balancer, which then balances between the different clouds you have, and that in turn goes through a cloud load balancer, which then routes into your clusters. So a bunch of different options for north-south traffic. Let's now look at east-west traffic. So in terms of east-west traffic, first of all, for service-to-service communication, Kubernetes makes this easy. Within a cluster, you don't have to worry about IP addresses or domain names. You can directly reference the service name, and Kubernetes will take care of routing the traffic to the appropriate pod which is running the service, and it can be multiple pods. Then let's think about communicating across clusters. So one service to another service in another cluster. Here you're going to have to expose that endpoint on the public internet and go through an egress and ingress onto the second cluster. So here you're opening up the endpoint to the public internet. It may be that you never want to expose those endpoints on the public internet. And in that case, there are options to think about tunneling the traffic. It could be a VPN, but VPNs are pretty messy to set up at scale. So you may also want to look at options for putting in place cluster-to-cluster bridges, or a third option is to directly provide endpoint-to-endpoint peer connectivity. And there's options, there's a pretty new option available in the community called Scupper. So that's a fairly new project, which makes it easy to achieve these peer-to-peer network tunneling options. So we've seen the network layer, a bunch of options to achieve application connectivity. Now let's look at application and data architecture concerns. First of all is the big decision, should I go with REST APIs or request response, or should I go more event-driven? And this is going to be just a quick opinion, but what I'm seeing and what we're seeing amongst Red Hat customers is that the trend is very much, we've seen a huge uptake in REST APIs, and REST APIs are pervasive, but a lot of the growth is around event-driven. It's a lot more closely aligned to the needs of businesses to be able to respond in real time to what's going on in the real world. So that's a big trend I'm seeing, and maybe some of you share that view as well. The next is to think about what enablers can you put in place to make those connectivity, that connectivity easier to achieve. And here I think in terms of enablers, and these can be used in combination, by the way. So you can use, you can choose to use REST APIs and combine it with some of the things on this slide. So here it goes into, for example, using enterprise integration patterns to be able to solve repeatable problems in a standard way. It's using standard connectors in order to be able to reach out easily to maybe a SaaS endpoint or a database endpoint and not have to be able to write lines of code to replicate how you connect to those endpoints manually each time. And the third aspect is to be able to take a data format that's exposed by an integration endpoint, and it may not match the needs that you have in the service that's consuming that endpoint. And so you may want to do some manipulation of data to get it in the right format so you can consume it easily. Then moving on to other tools that help you around application data connectivity. Here, of course, I'm sure everybody knows about API gateways, and so that's a very well understood approach in this, especially in this community. I don't need to explain that in more detail. But what we do see is an increase in the use of service mesh. So particularly within a cluster where you're doing east-west service-to-service communication, service mesh is a great way to be able to achieve the requirements, the governability requirements, the security requirements, and so on. But it's not always the right answer. And that's a key takeaway I'd like you to think about on API gateways versus service mesh. In very large organizations, and if you're running thousands of services, microservices in a cluster, you've probably got lots of different domain areas. And between those domain areas, you really want to treat the interfaces like north-south traffic. You want to manage those interfaces in the same way. So think always about getting the right combination of API management and service mesh. And as you start expanding more and more of these traffic management capabilities, one thing that we see is a proliferation of gateways and proxies on the data plane, and the same thing on control planes. What Red Hat is embarking on, together with partners and the community, is to be able to integrate and consolidate a lot of these layers to focus on a much simpler approach to managing your application connectivity requirements. So we've seen a lot of the different options that are available, very high-level overview. And so now in Hitchhiker's spirit, what is the answer? Which is the right way to go? And the answer is it's a matrix which guides you on the application connectivity requirements. Now, I'm not going to share with you the details on the matrix, but what I will share is a process to be able to figure out the right answer. First of all, look at the different criteria, define the criteria which make sense for your businesses. Secondly, define what are the options, and for example, talking to the different vendors here at API Days, and understand more broadly beyond REST APIs what integrations options you have. Also thinking about it at the three layers of network, application, and business. And then thirdly, evaluate in this matrix what's the right option for you. So hopefully that will be a process that you can start on. And now that you know the answer is 42, you may think, well, the real catch is, what is the question? And that's my call to action to you, to take this as a start and begin to think about what we can do next. Two key takeaways on what we can do next. One is to transfer learnings. I'm so impressed with the world of APIs and just how advanced things have become. And just two examples of things that are very relevant to the rest of the world of connectivity and integration. One is around standards. And we've seen with Open API specification how important it's been in the world of REST APIs. I remember the days before we even had Open API specification, and it was a bit like the world of Babelfish, everybody talking a different language. And we've seen in the world of events, Async API has taken off, which I'm really pleased to see. The second example is around developer portals as a vehicle to make it easy for developers to discover their endpoints. That same concept should also apply to the world of events. And the second area is around expanding the details in the matrix to think about how you interpret this matrix in your organizations and how to use this matrix as a way to bridge those gaps across the different teams. So with that, I thank you very much, and I look forward to your help to write the next chapter in this Hitchhiker's Guide or Hitchhacker's Guide to Application Connectivity. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. It's definitely an interesting topic. It's always difficult to identify how we can start, especially when you are embarking on this change and finding opportunities to optimize and identify areas where there's governance or something else. Do you have any advice in terms of which area the business should be looking at first?
Well, in terms of where businesses should start, the first thing is really look at the organizational aspects. And the biggest mistake I see amongst customers is that teams are working still too independently. And to use this approach of thinking more broadly about connectivity and across the layers, to use that as a basis to start getting the teams talking together.
Thank you. Have time for one or two questions? Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. And Mark is at the Red Hat booth, and welcome to take any questions there.
Yeah, please join us at the booth. Thank you.